Story 1. When I was 12, my mom and dad let me go trick-or-treating for the first time without any supervision. All these years later, I still remember how psyched I was that I was allowed out on my own for the first time. But little did I know it would prove to be my first and the last time trick-or-treating on my own. Around 5:30 p.m. me and my middle school friends all got together and started walking from house to house, but were faced with something of a problem. Some of the fancier houses, the ones with nice over-the-top decorations, were so jammed up with kids that some had literal lines forming down the driveways. So not wanting to line up for or candies, we figured we'd be smart and knock on the houses that no one else was knocking at. This was not a smart idea for obvious reasons, as the houses with no decorations sometimes tells you to go away or they just pretend not to be home. We knocked on this one house, which was at the end of the street. A man who looked to be in his 20s opened the door. By his facial expression, he looked grouchy, and we figured he was not happy to see us. We still asked for trick or treat, but he slammed the door on us, feeling suitably rejected. We decided to walk back down the driveway, but one of my friends was like, "Screw him," and knocks on the door again. The man answers the door and he says, "Trick or treat." The man then absolutely explodes and screams, "You knock on the door again and I will kill you," before slamming the door again. Most of us were like, "Let's just go," but this one friend of mine was basically not giving up too soon, so he went towards the door again despite our disapproval and shoved his finger into the house's doorbell and kept ringing it. We heard the man running from inside the house towards the door from the other side. Only this time he opens it up and has a huge gnarly-looking knife in his hands. As soon as we saw it, we just bowled up the driveway and out into the street. But I kid you not, this man followed us. We managed to maintain a steady distance between us as we ran, and that man was not as fast as us. But in all of our dumb costumes, we could not run as fast as normal, so we were in serious danger of tripping, falling, and slowing down enough for this psycho guy to catch up on us. At one point, we saw some lady taking out the trash, and we ran to her for help. She just looked at us like we were playing a prank, and then when she saw the guy with the knife, she bolted back indoors too. That was the worst feeling I ever felt because I knew no one was going to help us. The fastest one of us swerved over to a house on one side of the street we ran down, and we all followed him. Once we got closer, I realized he was bolting into an open garage. We followed him inside and barely managed to pull down the manual door, just in time to shut out the man with the knife. He then started to kick the garage door. All this banging summoned the homeowner into the garage. He looked at us and asked what we were doing. We explained the situation, and the guy ran off to call the cops. We were still in the garage, shaking and panting, still terrified that the man was going to break into garage somehow. The homeowner appeared in the garage with a cell phone in one hand and a gun in the other. Only then I actually started to feel safe. The cops showed up pretty quickly and arrested the man who was still banging on the garage door and didn't even try to run when the cops showed up. As we got outside, we saw that man being held against the ground with both his hands at the back. He gave us a death stare as we walked past him that gave me goosebumps all over my body. The cops led us home and we were never allowed to go trick-or-treating after that day. Story 2. When I was 16 in the mid-90s, aka the "I know everything, I'm invincible and you can't stop me" age, I got in a fight with an acquaintance while a whole bunch of us were hanging out at his house. Stupid fight. Can't remember what about, but I decided fuck it, I was going home. I lived about 5 miles away, but I didn't have a car, and since it was 2 a.m., there were no buses. I was going to walk home. In the middle of the night, though, a not as safe as it seemed neighborhood as a tiny 16-year-old girl. So I did. I think, in hindsight, my friends either didn't believe I was going to do it, or were too startled by the sudden argument to realize what I was doing. I left the house and started hoofing it. About a mile out, the suburban housing neighborhood melted into a main street with highway access. I started to notice a grayish minivan following me. It would follow me, pass me, turn a corner, and about 3 blocks later, it would do the same thing. I mean, really obvious what it was doing. I crossed over to the other side of the street, so I was walking the opposite of traffic flow, and thus no car could come up behind me. It kept doing it on the other side of the street. About a mile later, there was a 24-hour Fred Meyer, West Coast USA chain grocery/all-purpose store, lights bright but parking lot empty-ish. I immediately crossed the parking lot and went to head inside. Just before I got to the doors, the minivan that had been following me pulled up into one of the parking spots. A guy called out from the driver's side and said, "I don't want you to walk over here, just stay there and listen. I just wanted to let you know what I was doing." I saw you walking a while back, but I also saw a dark car that was following you. A couple of times you went to turn around or stopped, so it started following you down a parallel side street. When I saw it, I started to follow you both, just to make sure you were safe. Go inside the store and call someone to come pick you up, please. I haven't seen the car since you headed across the lot." He waited until I was inside the store and then pulled away. I didn't have anyone to call, so I just let the night cashier know what was going on and hung out with her for about an hour and a half. Then I finished the walk home. I've never forgotten the incident, or that man, whoever he was. During the walk, I never saw the dark car he mentioned, but I've always been convinced he saved my life that night. Story 3 on Halloween. Back in 2013, I hosted a sleepover with two of my friends, Leah and Sarah. Leah was very jumpy while Sarah was the calm and confident one. We met up around 3 p.m. and set up a tent in my backyard. We live in the southern part of Russia, and our neighborhood is surrounded by large trees, and my backyard eventually leads to a thick forest. We made it as cozy as possible. We set it up next to the back gate, which at the time was old and rusty. We all went to trick-or-treating right after we set up our tent. It was around 7 p.m. by then. We met up with some other friends and had a really good time, and went back home around 10 p.m. with the Russian weather being kind. It was dry all evening, and thankfully the neighborhood was pretty nice, and we didn't have to deal with grumpy adults who dislike Halloween. It was very peaceful that evening. We roasted marshmallows, played truth or dare, and told each other horror stories. We laid down to sleep around 11, and by then it was pitch black out, and the fairy lights in the garden barely illuminated anything, but it didn't bother us as much. Out of nowhere, in the middle of the night, something woke us up. It was a creaking sound coming from the back gate. Me and Leah sat up while Sarah shot up from her drowsy state. "Did you guys hear that?" she whispered slowly in a frightened tone. Just as she said that, we heard a soft growl coming from something outside. We were fully alert now. Sarah covered Leah's mouth in case she was going to scream as we listened carefully in the silent night. When the growl turned into heavy breathing, we almost jumped out of our skins. It wasn't a human. We looked at each other trying to figure out what was making that noise. The rattling came from the gate again. Tears formed in Leah's eyes, and I couldn't move. It was like my 13-year-old self was paralyzed. We just sat there waiting for it to end. But it only got worse. Whatever it was desperately trying to get in, and we knew in a matter of minutes it would. I could feel my heart beating through my whole body, and my fingers turning cold. We knew it wasn't safe to be there anymore and decided to make a run for it. My house was 20 meters away. Sarah looked at me and nodded. She showed me her fingers and counted down. That was when we were going to run. When she hit 0, we all made a mad dash back inside the house. We reached the back door. They started twisting the door's handle. At that moment, I looked back out of curiosity, and I will forget that image. When I turned around, I saw a beast-like creature standing right outside the gate, shaking it violently. I was sure it wasn't a human. It was very tall enough to jump over the gate and easily catch up to us. But for reason it didn't. It had gray hair that covered its whole body and bright red eyes. Those pair of eyes were something that I would remember my whole life. Leah and Sarah were so busy opening the door, they didn't even bother to look back. As soon as they managed to get it open, we ran inside, locked the door behind us, and went straight into my mom's bedroom. We woke her up and started sobbing. She asked what was wrong, and we told her everything. She laughed and said, "It must be someone pranking us since it was Halloween." But I knew what I saw was real, and not some lame prank. We slept in my bedroom after that, or rather we pretended to sleep. Story 4. Vertical Bar, Unknown. I was home alone once when my parents were out of town. We had just moved into our house, so there was an empty lot next to our house with a house half built. My parents were the types to leave the outdoor side garage door unlocked. Dumbasses, I know. Well, while they were gone, I was watching TV, and all of a sudden the door that leads into my garage from the inside starts to wiggle. I put my TV on mute and I listen again. I see it actually move that time. I start freaking out and I'm kind of in shock looking for the phone. Can't find the house phone, so I search for my cell. Remembered I left my charger in my parents' car, so I'm frantically looking for the house phone. Our house was so new my mom hadn't even put blinds or drapes up in the kitchen or living room. Well, whoever was wiggling my garage door knob starts banging on the windows in my living room. Again, no blinds or phone, and at that moment I realize this guy is seeing my every move, so I shoot upstairs. Again, looking frantically for the phone and also trying to figure out how and where I'd jump out of my house to get away from the maniac that's outside my house if I needed to. He then starts pounding on my front door. I can tell at that point he's using something metal or plastic by the sound of the thumps. I really thought he was going to shoot my door open. I remember at that moment I was pissed at myself for being a dumbass teenager that frequently talked on the phone because I always just left it lying around, never putting it back on the base. I wanted so badly to push the button that detects where my house phone is, but I thought if he heard where it was, he'd break the window nearest to it and take it. I then remembered I left the phone in my mom's room, and as I pass the hallway to her room, I see two people pacing in front of my house. I'm freaking out trying to find my dad's gun in my parents' bedroom. I find the phone and call 911. As I'm on the phone, the window breaks. I'm upstairs and I'm scared to death. Suddenly, everything goes silent. I'm waiting in my parents' pitch-black closet for what seems like an eternity. Then I hear the sirens. Cops show up, but there is no one to be found. I figured that they hadn't gone too far since it had just occurred. Cops never found my tormentors. On the plus side, the company building the house next door, same company that built ours, hired overnight security to stay on our street until the house was built, which was definitely refreshing. I was 17 at the time, and I suffered from night terrors for about a month, then recovered. Story 5. When I was 12, I was allowed to go trick-or-treating for the first time with my friends. We had a curfew of 9 p.m. sharp, and by around 8:30 we realized we didn't have enough candy, so we started going quickly from house to house trying to cover as much ground as possible. When our watches hit 8:45, most of us suggested calling it a night, but my heart was set on just one more house. No one wanted to get into trouble, but I insisted, saying just one more house and we'll go home. So we walked over to this one last house up the driveway into the front door. I pressed the doorbell, but one of my friends realized that the door was already open. It was only ever so slightly ajar, but it was open. We didn't push the door open or anything and just carried on buzzing the doorbell. We thought maybe it was left open on purpose. Another one of my friends called out hello, but nobody answered. We were just about to walk away when we heard a thud like someone kicked a couch or something. Not a super alarming sound, but enough to stop and turn us back to check it out. Again I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Still no response, only this time we pushed open the door. What we saw was a long trail cream-colored carpet with what was obviously blood on it. At first we thought maybe it was a decoration, but upon closer look we realized it was actual blood, and we all froze for a second, totally dumbstruck. Then one of us just sprinted off in the direction of the neighbor's house and banged on the door while me and my other friend waited there. At that time I heard some noises coming from inside, like something or someone rubbing against the carpet. "Hey, did you hear it too?" I asked my friend, and he nodded yes. The lights of the house were turned off and we could barely see anything. I squinted my eyes and looked around, trying to find where the sound came from, when suddenly a shadow emerged from behind the couch. It was a tall figure and it looked straight into our direction. We figured it was a man. I had a bad feeling about it. My brain couldn't possibly comprehend the blood on the carpets. Then suddenly this man showed up. My friend pulled my costume from behind and whispered that we should go to the neighbor's house where our other friend was. We tried to slowly back away, and when he saw us leaving, he sprinted straight towards us before we could do anything. He got close and pushed me to the ground and slashed my friend's arm with a sharp object, which was most likely a knife, and then made a run for it. I got myself up and went up to my friend, who was groaning in pain, told him to calm down and that the police would arrive soon. I saw that man jump over the fence of the house, which was on the other side of the street, and disappear into the night. My other friend came with the neighbor, and I told him that a man had stabbed him. The neighbor went back to his house and brought some bandages and wrapped them around my friend's arm. Within about 20 minutes, the street outside flooded with blue and red flashing lights. Me and my buddies sat on the curb outside answering some cops' questions. We weren't that helpful because we couldn't see the man's face the whole time. But the worst part was when they wheeled someone out with a sheet over them, so we knew whoever's blood it was probably wasn't with us anymore. My friend was taken to the hospital immediately after that, and his parents were informed about the incident. As you can imagine, our parents must have been pretty livid with us because we didn't get home until about 10:30 p.m., but since the cops dropped us home, they knew something must have happened. Luckily, my friend's wound was not that deep and he recovered soon. I remember my dad kept checking the newspaper for any info, but all he could find was a tiny mention of a home invasion on Halloween. It was a very traumatic thing a child could ever experience. I don't know if the man was ever caught, as there was no further information given, and I also feel sad for the person who died. Only if we had been a bit early, maybe we could have saved him. Story 6. My friend and I were driving back from the movies one night when we were 16. I had a curfew of maybe 12. Anyway, so we're driving back and doing good on time. We lived in a smallish suburb on the edge of a city. Beyond my neighborhood was just country and pretty small towns, so we pull up to the main intersection in town, sitting in my friend's convertible with the top down. To the left is the grocery store on that corner block, and to the right is Walmart. We're looking towards the east and see these 3 lights in formation coming towards us really slowly, and they seem to be pretty low on the horizon. The lights slowly turn together and pass over the Walmart, probably behind it, and then zoom off in the direction of my house, which was a few miles away in that direction down a country type of road. And when I say zoom off, I mean at incredible speed. It was probably going from 50 mph to 5,000 mph in an instant. We both looked at each other and just didn't even know what to say as the light turned green. We continued down the street, and as we went, every single streetlight went out as we approached it. We turned onto that country road my house is off of, and every single streetlight went out down that road. We turn onto the road my house is on, and every single freaking streetlight, I shit you not, goes black. We were screaming at each other, "What is happening?" We pull into the cul-de-sac I lived on, and I remember checking my watch because my parents were kind of neurotic about curfew, and I'm the type to always check my watch. 10 minutes till. I'm good and home and can go inside and be safe. I get out of his car and start walking up the driveway. As I get close to the garage doors, there's a huge flash of light, and then it was gone, and I turned and walked up the sidewalk and stairs into my house. My parents were still up. They're kind of night owls, which has rubbed off onto me to this day. And my dad starts giving me a hard time about being late. I incredulously start saying, "What? It's 10 till." And I look at my watch, and it's like a few minutes past midnight. Then my dad smiles and says, "It's okay, you're not that late." But I insist that I got here at 10 till. I tell my parents what happened. They don't completely believe me, but seem a little weirded out because when I was a little kid, I would have night terrors about aliens taking me away during the night. So I call my friend to ask what he saw. He says I circled around and was stopped at the stop sign about to turn out off the circle when I saw a bright flash of light in my rearview mirror. I turned around and didn't see you anywhere, so I drove away. For years after that, probably about 10, when I would drive around at night, I'd have streetlights go out on me. It would really freak out my friends when I would tell them about it. Sometimes I could feel when it was going to happen and call it. It was really weird, just like a feeling of intuition. It was especially strong when I'd be out walking at night. I was an art student, so my best friend, not the one from the story, but my college roommate, would go out doing photography late at night. I had told him about my story, and he didn't get creeped out until we were out shooting and the lights kept going out. I wish I had taken the time to get a video camera to document it, because this was right before smartphones were very common, and by that point the ability, if you can call it that, has subsided significantly. These days, it doesn't even happen anymore. A few years after that event, I found out my grandpa would have visits during the night. My grandma said he would get up during the night and stand at the window and say that they are here, and there would be a really bright light out the window and it would fade away. They even claimed to have seen a small ship late one night hovering over their car when they were leaving a fair out in the country. I had my first kid a couple years ago, and my second recently. There is rarely a night where the thought doesn't cross my mind about something coming to take them during the night, and how powerless I would be to stop that from happening. I've intentionally made certain my kids don't see any of the typical alien imagery, and haven't told them anything and don't plan to until they're older. I want to see if they ever say anything or draw any pictures. I'm hoping it skips a generation or something. Story 7. It was Halloween night, and there were many kids out on the street trick-or-treating, and the adults were giving out their candies. I went with my school friends Jimmy, Marshall, and Clyde, and after we were done, we went on a park bench and started eating and trading our candies. After a while, we started to feel bored. There was nothing to do for the rest of the night. Jimmy had an idea about exploring the abandoned hospital which was down the road. There were many rumors about it being haunted, so we were all excited and agreed to go. It was around 10:30 p.m. when we got there. The hospital was gigantic, with it being about around 10 floors tall and was pretty wide. The door was locked, but as it was made of glass, someone had already broken it. We went inside through the broken part, and as soon as we got in, we were hit by the stench of dead rats. We looked around and saw molds that were growing in. We saw some equipment lying on the floor and things scattered everywhere. After walking around for a bit, our whole group noticed that they saw something running behind us every couple of minutes. However, we didn't have a clue what it was. Then we heard a soft voice telling us to leave a couple of times, which gave us a chill. We looked around to figure out where the sound was coming from, and a couple of minutes later we heard a piercing scream. We looked around again and realized that Clyde had disappeared. That's when it got serious. We were terrified and wanted to leave, but it was latched shut from the outside, and we were on the 8th floor. We shouted for him with tears in our eyes. After yelling for a while, we soon accepted our situation and gave up. Marshall went into one of the rooms and found many syringes on a table. We took some and decided to split up to find Clyde. Marshall swung his arms with the syringe in his hands as he walked. Jimmy looked for Clyde while I tried to find a fire escape. The corridors were barely lit up with moonlight, and I was dependent on that since it was my only light source. I found an escape, and when I opened the door, I saw a person standing on the stairs about 10 feet away from me with a clown costume on which looked centuries old. He screamed at me and laughed like a maniac, which startled me. He was holding something. It seemed like a knife. I ran back towards where my friends were, and surprisingly, the clown didn't follow me. As soon as I met up with them, I gasped for air as I told them what I saw. They couldn't believe it. Marshall burst into tears. I also told them about the fire exit, but we didn't want to leave Clyde behind, so we decided to find him as quickly as possible and get the hell out of there. We stuck together this time and looked for Clyde. We stumbled upon that clown maniac again, and I could feel my heart beating very fast. Jimmy yelled at him, "What did you do to our friend?" But the clown just laughed maniacally, and that's when we heard Clyde's voice coming from a room. Adrenaline rushed through my veins, and I charged right toward him and stabbed him with a syringe. Meanwhile, Jimmy smashed the door open with the fire extinguisher that was hanging on the wall. He went in and saw Clyde tied up. Marshall saw me struggling, so he picked up the fire extinguisher and ran towards us. He hit him on the head, and the clown passed out on the ground. Jimmy freed Clyde, and they came out. As we were running towards the exit, I saw an open room and saw something inside. I stopped for a while to see what it was, and what I was looking at was the body of a girl tied to a chair. I screamed as I saw it, and my friends stopped and asked what happened. I pointed my finger towards the room, and they all looked inside and saw it as well. Marshall almost puked, and we ran out of the hospital. We went straight to the police station and told them everything. Police were dispatched, and we were informed that the body was real, but they couldn't find the clown. We were escorted back to our houses and told our parents what had happened. A few days later, I was watching the TV and saw the news about a missing teenage girl. When I looked at the picture, I realized that girl looked exactly like the dead body we found in the hospital room. After that incident, we never went to any abandoned places, and on Halloween we just had sleepovers at each other's places. Story 8. We rented a house that never felt like home. You always felt creeped out walking in there like you were being watched. My BF and our roommate both worked nights, so I would be there by myself a lot. One night I was doing my usual stuff and watching some TV before bed. I had this overwhelming feeling all night that I should avoid the hallway and not look directly down it. It was creepy. The feeling of being watched and terrified lasted about 2 hours before I decided to suck it up and make my way to my room. I left the hallway lights on and went to bed. Just as I turned of the side table light, I heard a drawer being pulled out and hitting the stopper. I turned on the light and nothing was out of place. This went on about 6 times before I decided I was sleeping with the light on. I curled up under the covers and waited for the BF to get home. He comes rolling in about 3 a.m. He's laughing at me for being such a pussy, gets into bed and turned the light off, and that's when all hell broke loose. All the doors down the hallway slammed shut one by one, then our closet doors started rattling. The sound coming from inside could only be described as total destruction. It sounded like the shelves, the pole, and everything in there was being tossed around. The BF joined me under the covers, and we were both terrified. After it stopped, it took 5 to 10 minutes to convince him to go check around the house. Nothing was out of place, and our roommate had drove 3 hours back home that night to be with his family, so we knew it wasn't him. We slept with the light on the rest of the night and moved out soon after. I still can't drive by that house without being creeped out. Story 9. This happened when I was a senior in high school. It was Halloween, and my friend called me over to his house. His parents went on an anniversary trip for a week, and his older sister was at college, so he literally had his 3-bedroom house to himself. He decided to throw a Halloween party at his house, and it wasn't just any party where you invite a few people to chill, hang out, and have some drinks. He threw a rager, the kind of party where half of our entire high school managed to get an invite to. Everyone wore their costumes, and there were about 100 people. The whole house was bouncing. There was no planning involved. And my buddy is a carefree guy who didn't want anyone to be left. So he was just like, bring all your friends or friends of friends. He invited everyone he knew on Facebook. So people who we didn't even know showed up. This turned out pretty cool for the most part, and we ended up meeting some decent people as a result. Not everyone that showed up was cool or was there to just chill, and we learned it the hard way that you shouldn't just let everyone and anyone into a house party unless you want some bad guys to show up. The party was pumping and people were drinking, dancing, and having fun. It was an awesome time. But then some drama apparently kicked off in the upstairs bedroom when one of the randoms that showed up was caught stealing by someone who knew my buddy. He was being a good friend and took it personally, wanting to keep our friend's house safe. So he started telling this random thief to leave the party before he gets knocked out. The thief's boys stepped in, but they were outnumbered by everyone at the party. So they went back down and headed for the front door. But as they were leaving, this mutual friend of ours was walking them out. He bragged about himself and said that they were smart not to mess with him as he was an MMA fighter and easily beat the crap out those 3 single-handedly, just drunk guy stuff. You know, he was probably showing off in front of his girl or something. I went up to him and held him as he was wobbling because he was drunk and couldn't stand by himself. As they left, he sang a goodbye song and slammed the door in their faces. I told him to chill out, and that made him a bit angry. He shoved me off and told me that he could walk by himself and didn't need any assistance. Not wanting any more trouble, I simply backed off. He turned around to the crowd and stood there proudly, putting his fists on hips, puffing his chest out in some Superman pose like, yeah, I kicked these idiots out. People were literally clapping for the dude like he was some kind of a hero. And out of nowhere, we heard a cracking sound coming from the streets outside before our hero just slumps to the ground. Everyone started screaming, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Suddenly, my heart dropped, and I looked towards the door. There were bullet marks. People started running around the house. One of the thieves we just kicked out had a gun on him, and he was so angry at the way our friend had humiliated them that he pulled it out and fired it right at the front door, and he ended up shooting this 4 times in his back and neck. We immediately called 911 and he was rushed to the hospital, but one of the bullets nicked an artery, and even though he was taken to the hospital in good time, he didn't make it. The shooter handed himself into the police the next day. Apparently, he had no idea that there was someone still behind the door and just wanted to damage some property while scaring the people still inside the house. He had no intention to actually hurt anyone, and through some sort of plea, he managed to pretty much get off a second-degree murder. He got a super lenient sentence, and this all happened 10 years ago. So I'm pretty sure that the guy was going to get released soon, and that scares me way more. Knowing that there is a dude who murdered someone at a party I was at, and he is just free to walk around the city like the thing he did wasn't even that big of a deal. Like how you're supposed to just act like nothing happened all those years ago because it's something I have never forgotten, and I doubt I ever will. My biggest fear is bumping into this guy somewhere. Not sure if I will be able to hold it together if I see him. I have been traumatized since that incident and have been extra careful wherever I go. I hope he decided to get a fresh start in a new city. I mean, that is what I would do. I just wouldn't be able to hand around the same old people knowing I murdered one of them. Story 10. This is a story that happened to me not too long ago. It was Halloween, and in my town there was a 2-story house which was rumored to be haunted. Out of curiosity, my best friend Carl and I decided to check if the rumors were true, so we went to that house for trick-or-treat. It was about 11 p.m., and it took us a while to get to that house as it was a bit far from the neighborhood. When we arrived at the house, we rang the doorbell. A man who looked to be in his mid-30s opened the door. He had a cigarette in his hand, and he was dressed in a hoodie and ripped jeans. He looked somewhat tired. My friend mentioned the rumor about his house being haunted. We laughed out loud, but he didn't reply to anything we said. He just stared at us, and then he said, "You kids are a little late for Halloween. It's going to end in a few minutes." We looked at our watch and realized there were only 5 minutes left before it struck 12. He then told us the candy was in his room and offered us to come inside. We sat on the living room couch waiting for the man who had gone upstairs. However, When he came back, he insisted on us going upstairs because he had Reese's chocolate, which was my favorite at the time. He also told us that he had something upstairs that would fascinate us, so being the dumb teenagers, we took him up on the offer. We went upstairs following behind him and went inside a dimly lit room. Inside the room, we saw different kinds of knives hanging on the wall. It looked as if the man was collecting knives, which we thought was a pretty cool hobby. The man approached us and gave us each 2 pieces of chocolate. Although he didn't say anything, we thanked him and turned around to go downstairs. All of a sudden, Carl screamed in pain and fell down the stairs. I turned around and saw the man holding what appeared to be a red-colored knife in his hand, probably one from his collection. With mixed emotions, my adrenaline immediately kicked in. I tried to punch the man in his face, but he turned back and then stabbed me in my left leg. I barely managed to hold back the pain and literally started punching his face multiple times until he passed out. He collapsed and I took the knife out as I groaned in immense pain. I started limping, holding Carl in one arm, and we finally got out of that house. I could see that there was blood all over Carl's back. We went to the nearest house we could find and they called 911 for us. A few minutes later, the cops arrived and arrested the man. Surprisingly, he was still knocked out. The ambulance took me and Carl to the hospital. I wasn't hurt too bad, but Carl was stabbed 2 times in the back and bled out a lot. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. After a few days, the police reported to my parents that the man was a registered sex offender and pedophile who had raped a few children before. Luckily, he was sent to prison right after they arrested him. After that incident, I never went inside any stranger's house. I still wonder what would have happened to us if we had failed to escape from that house. The sole thought of it still haunts me to this day. Story 11. This is the story of how a creepy encounter with a scary man at a harbor cafe saved me from something even more terrifying. It was in the autumn of 1994, and I was 19 years old. At the time, my dad had been working for almost 6 months abroad, and I was planning a surprise visit. My dad and I have always been close. I'm an only child, and my mother died of cancer when I was still a baby. So it was just my dad, and I really, a tiny little family, but he made up for it by being the most awesome parent ever. Now that I wasn't a little kid anymore, I appreciated that more and more. I had booked the ticket and was ready to go. It was going to be great fun to surprise him with a visit. I had to take the ferry though, and I had just gotten my driving license and felt really unhappy about having to drive my little car on board the ferry, and decided to not bring a car at all, and just rent one once I got there. Having time to spend, I decided to have coffee at a nearby cafe since I was early, and they hadn't started letting people onto the ferry just yet. At the cafe there were lots of truck drivers, and I soon realized I was the only woman there. One man, a 40-ish bloke with ice blue eyes and tattoos all over, was eyeing me from across the room. Something about him made my skin crawl. I got up to leave, feeling suddenly very uncomfortable, and to my utter horror, he followed. What do I do now? I asked myself. This was before everyone owned a cell phone, I might add. I decided to try and look busy and maybe he would leave me alone. So I pulled out my ticket and tried to look like I was reading it carefully, when he suddenly snatched it from my hand and said, "I'm on the same boat. I'll have hours of your company then, how lovely," in a voice that was an absurd combination of jovial flattery and hidden hostility. I felt it very strongly that if I got on that boat with this man who now knew my booking details, I'd be in grave danger. I can't explain why the feeling was so overwhelming, but it was, and I decided there and then to not get on the boat. The ticket had been cheap anyway. I could get on the next one instead. I hid in the ladies' room until I knew the ferry had left, and then I went to rebook my ticket. The story could have ended here, a creepy encounter with a stalkerish man, but it doesn't. I was right in the assumption that getting on that ferry would have been unbelievably dangerous. Have you figured it out yet? The date was September 28, 1994. The name of the ship was MS Estonia, and that cold night she sank in the Baltic Sea, taking 852 people with her, resulting in the worst ferry catastrophe to strike Sweden to this day. I still recall that day with horror and wonder what would have happened if this creepy man had not taken an interest in me. If I had not listened to my instinct and gotten on board instead of waiting for the next boat, would I have been among the survivors? Or would my dad have seen my name on the list of lives lost in the Baltic Sea? Story 12. My 8-year-old self was sitting in the dining room drawing at the kitchen table. I hear what sounded exactly like my mother say hello to me. "Hello, Ryan." I turned to my left, expecting to see my mother. Instead, a full body shadow person is standing there about 10 feet away from me, standing in my kitchen. I sat in shock, looking at it for about 10 seconds. It then turned to its left and walked into the wall. I stand up and walk also to my right into my living room where my brother is doing homework. "What's wrong?" "I saw a ghost." "Is that what called your name?" It is very notable I never told my brother it said my name. To give some backstory to who this shadow person may have been, my grandmother died about 6-8 months before from lung cancer. She had the same voice as my mother, as well as she cared for me when I was a baby. I never knew her well. In her terminal stages of her life, I went and saw her with my family. She looked incredibly bad. The only remembrance of my grandmother is when she was dying. The one thing I have found truly odd about the experience is how much power it would have taken to manifest yourself and speak. And out of any message to tell me using that much power you say hello to me, it's just so weird. Story 13. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first, I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed, the same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I laid awake reading a magazine. After a while, I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open, and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then, they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen into the living room and leaped over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start, a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side, the paralyzing fear was back. Forcing myself to turn my head, the shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again, I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face, only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen, maybe more, but it happened a lot. The next morning, I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening, the shuffling feet, the fridge door opening, nobody in the kitchen, being awakened with a paralyzing fear, the shadow, the heavy breathing, the repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things, but instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." Story 14. So, just a few important points of note here to set the stage for what is to come. I used to love just sitting on a swing in my backyard at night and listening to music. It was, and still is, really very cathartic. Also, my best friend B lived 2 houses down from me and went running every single night, rain, snow, sleet, sick, whatever. I could probably count on one hand the amount of days he hasn't gone running in the past 10 years or so. And finally, I'm a grown man, over 6 feet tall and almost 200 pounds. There isn't any wildlife where I live that I'd really be nervous about aside from bobcats or maybe black bears, but both of those avoid people at all costs, and bears don't live in the area as far as I know. And it would take a pretty monstrously huge person to make me really scared. Also of note, I make it a point to try to be as rational as possible, and I also make it a point for myself to not be intimidated by stuff because I hate feeling afraid or helpless. I just say all these things to emphasize how fucking crazy the following situation was. Anyways, one night, just like any other night, around maybe 10 p.m. or so, I decided to go sit on the swing. I gathered my jacket, headphones, and a beer and walked outside. Immediately upon stepping onto my driveway, I got this really weird feeling like I was being watched, thinking nothing of it, because it was nighttime and it was probably just my primitive brain. I turned the corner by the edge of the house and started walking back towards the swing set. Every step that I took, that uneasy feeling got stronger and stronger until it was almost at panicky levels. I could feel it in my stomach, my body suddenly felt very cold, and I finally accepted mentally that I was alarmed. But I still rationalized it as my primitive brain doing its job. However, the weird thing is, as I got closer to the swings, I started getting more and more nervous, and I literally started walking slower, to the point that eventually I just stopped about 10 feet away and was looking around and at the woods beyond the swing, genuinely unsettled and perplexed. Again, there are no recorded confirmed black bear attacks where I'm from, and chances are high that I would survive a black bear and/or a bobcat attack, barring freak circumstances. So, it's not something that would subconsciously freak me out like that. And like I said, they'd most likely run into the woods if they saw me anyway. Anyways, as I settled down onto the swing, I was afraid. I had no idea why or of what. I was trying to man up and swallow it down, but I knew deep down I was truly scared. So I swing through one song, pausing the music every once in a while to listen to the night, which I never do. I got through one song, and the feeling just kept getting stronger. It wasn't the normal hairs standing up on the back of your neck scared. It literally felt like there was this overwhelming, malicious presence that was just heavy in the air. I swear I could almost feel it just pressing down on me from all around. It was like hateful, and I never use this word because I think it's been cheapened by religious fanatics, but it was evil. There's no way around it. Something bad, really bad, was there. So I got up and turned to swing facing the woods, which I never did. I kept an eye on the yard because my friends were known to try to sneak up on me. I got through maybe half of the next song, and somehow this feeling had continued to grow more and more. I've read in books descriptions like bone-chillingly terrifying and too scared to move, and I always kind of shrugged them off as hyperbole. I certainly had never experienced anything even close to that. Until that night, I was fucking terrified. I literally can't emphasize that enough. I swear to God I could feel it in my bones and my muscles. I was literally shivering. I've never been worried like that before. I'm a person. I'm an apex predator, but in that moment it hit me like an epiphany. I felt like prey. I couldn't see anything bad out there. I couldn't hear anything, smell anything. But I was completely and utterly scared beyond all rationality, like almost on the brink of tears. I didn't know why, and I couldn't rationalize it, so I tried to just go on with what I was doing, like nothing was up. But it just kept getting. The only way I can think to describe it is heavier, heavier, and heavier. You know those videos of the mice shaking with terror before they're eaten by a snake? That's probably the closest description to what I looked and felt like. I turned my music off and just sat, beer forgotten, looking around and at the woods. Just completely stock still except my head, desperately refusing to surrender to my baser instincts, despite everything in me telling me to run. It was a warm summer night, and I was freezing. I could feel it all the way to my bones, and my stomach was a knot of ice. It was seriously the strangest feeling I've ever had. I could just feel this sense of impending doom, and also this utterly malicious presence. It was like a panic attack mixed with that feeling when you know something bad happened but you don't know what. Mixed with when you hear something in the house that you know had to be a person, but your family hadn't said anything about coming to the house that night. It was all of those feelings combined, and with the feeling that you're being watched, and that feeling you get when you know someone doesn't like you, and all amplified like 100 times. I've never been more terrified in my life. I literally couldn't take it anymore. I jumped off the swing and sprinted back inside, closed and locked the door, checked all the doors and windows, closed all the curtains, turned on all the lights, and surrounded myself with an arsenal of melee weapons in the middle of the living room. I could still feel it, but it was slowly fading. I didn't sleep that night, which never happens to me. I can pass out almost at a whim, but I was too high-strung to sleep or eat or leave the couch. I just sat, no TV, no books, just sat thinking about what the fuck just happened. The next morning I saw my friend B out by his car, so I walked over and started telling him about it because I was so confused and honestly pretty deeply disturbed by the experience. Even after that long body of text, I don't feel like I've conveyed how bizarre and terrifying it actually was. So, as I'm telling him, he held up a hand and said, hold on, stop right there, come with me." So we went into his house and we walked up to his little sister, Sam. He said, "Hey Sam, what did I say last night when I came in from running? Why didn't I go running last night?" And she looked at us weird and said something to the effect of, "You felt like something was off and you didn't feel safe. You felt like something was out there." Apparently, and he lives 2 houses down from me, he walked outside to stretch and felt a weird vibe. As he walked to the end of his driveway, it got stronger and he started getting nervous. He started running and stopped after a few feet, turned his music off and scanned the woods. Then he started running again, got to my driveway and was so scared and uncomfortable and freaked out that he just decided to call it quits for the night. He never does that. When we were talking about it the next day after talking to his sister, he literally said that he felt like a prey animal being stalked by something evil. Exactly how I'd felt. Everyone always kind of laughs it off when we tell them that story, or thinks we somehow colluded and matched our stories up. But he specifically took me in to talk to Sam before I spoke, so that I'd know there was no bullshit. I have absolutely no idea what it was, and it hasn't happened again since, and that was like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Anyways, now I only swing facing the woods and I carry a bat down there with me, even though I don't feel like I need it. But just in case. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.